Hello everyone, welcome back to Upside Down Data. Today I want to talk about Harmony and its native token 1 and what some of our indicators make of its recent price action, along with some other considerations. If you like the content and remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like and follow us on Twitter, where we put out regular updates about our risk indicators and more. So those following the one market, probably the question that everyone's asking, as always, is where might it be going from here? What can we maybe expect one to do? It's been rallying out of the lows that it put in relatively recently. What might be going on next? And so I think a good indicator to look at first to get an idea of where one might be heading is our trend confidence indicator. This is a machine learning based model we have here at the channel that's designed to essentially give us an idea of how confident we should be in the current trend an asset's in. So if an asset's in an uptrend, how confident should we be in that uptrend? If the asset is in a downtrend, how confident should we be in that downtrend continuing? So the way you can read this is that 0 is kind of the critical level, and then anything above 0 is kind of bullish. That's what we want to see, and anything below 0 is kind of bearish. And the way you can kind of interpret this is that if the asset is in an uptrend, and then the TCI flips red, that's a bad sign. That suggests that uptrend might be at its end. Whereas if the asset is in a downtrend and the TCI flips green, that might suggest that the downtrend's over, upside is coming. And one of the nice things about this indicator is it tends to be very quick, if not a leading indicator. It can oftentimes call changes in the trend before the trend is actually even flipped, before the changes come. So really it can kind of act as an early warning sign to say, hey, pay attention, the current trend might be coming to an end. We can see how this has performed in the past. So we can look, for example, in right before the big run up in early 2021, you can see that the TCI flipped green basically right here and then stayed green all the way up to the top here. So basically from here to here, TCI called this move and then stayed green the whole time. And then of course on the other side, then what happened is that the second we kind of put in that top, very quickly the TCI went down and flipped into the red, saying that this was the end, kind of marked the likely end of that uptrend. And that's exactly what we saw. Then we were just down in the doldrums, down in bearish territory for a while, and the TCI was down in the deep red. But then it trended back up and actually flipped back green here in the summer, had just one close back down here in the red, but then was off to the races going up towards this peak here. Had a little bit of indecision here, but then ultimately stayed green for the all-time high. So that's just basically the way that it's kind of been. And then again, flipped red to kind of before this big move to the downside, briefly green again for this move back up, and then red. And then you'll notice that where we stand right now is we flipped back into the green zone and actually pretty decently back up, back over this one level over here. So that's good news, right? This means that from the TCI's perspective, even though you could look at this and say, oh, we're still in the downtrend, right? You know, that might be one way you could look at it, that you're just kind of overall trending down. TCI thinks that's not the case. The TCI thinks that this is more likely to be an uptrend, or looks a lot more like an uptrend that we're currently in right here, than a continuation of this downtrend. Another way of saying that is that if you are reading this as a downtrend, there's not a lot of reason to be thinking that it is a downtrend anymore, because it's flipped green. So this is something that I'm going to be watching as we go forward, is can the TCI stay above 0 for one? If that's the case, then I think we can maintain confidence that this is a bullish positioning for the asset, and that it's not likely to be a downtrend. Should one, maybe correct or falter in this rally and this flip back down below 0, that would be a sign for concern, or reason to be worried and to think that maybe we are just going to continue back down into a downtrend. But so far so good. If you're hoping to see a rally out of 1, this is a box you definitely want to check to see the TCI flip green. And in fact, it flipped green basically right around here. Okay, so let's talk about another indicator we have here at the channel, the upside downside potential indicator, or UDPI. So I'm showing you here the long-term UDPI. So this cares about moves that play out over months to years, so much longer time preference or time horizon that it looks at. And essentially what it's doing is assessing risk. It's assessing how much upside versus downside potential does the asset likely have. So up in these high numbers around 5, this would be when the upside potential has been exhausted, downside potential is quite large. -5 is the opposite. Downside potential has been exhausted, upside potential is quite large. And this is just the price action of 1 across time, color-coded to the output of the UDPI. And you can see the UDPI does a good job of identifying these low risk zones where accumulating one has historically been advantageous, as well as these high risk zones where distributing one has been historically advantageous. And what you'll notice is that right now we're back into the green zone, the first time we've done that since the summer of 21. Now, obviously, we don't know what's going to happen next, but the last time we were down these levels, we put in this big rally to the upside. And I think that if the crypto markets were to remain bullish, if Bitcoin doesn't capitulate or if broader macro conditions don't interfere, don't get in the way, we avoid a stock market collapse or something like that, then it's very plausible that we could see a similar kind of move like we saw out of the summer come up. Plausible. Not guaranteed, but plausible. So we take another look at this. This is the UDPI across time, so just the raw level. So on the y-axis here we have UDPI level, and then across time. And here's where we're sitting now. We're getting close back to about -2. We had dipped down to around -3. A similar level where we were over the summer, had that nice move back to the upside. So who knows, maybe we'll be able to rally up here again as well. Time will tell. We're still early days in that, as we can see here. But it's totally plausible from the perspective of this model. A lot of upside potential that could happen in the coming months to longer. So just to wrap up the discussion of the UDPI, I want to talk about the other time frames that we monitor. So I was showing you the long term. We also look at the medium term UDPI, which cares about moves that play out over weeks to months. It's a bit shorter in its time preference, and the short term UDPI that take place over days to weeks, or is reactive to moves that play out over days to weeks. And what we can see is that in the medium term and the short term, they're both higher than the long term, with the short term actually being quite undecided. So here it thinks that the realistic upside versus downside potential is roughly even from its estimation, whereas the medium term UDPI is a little bit more bullish. It thinks there's more upside than downside potential realistic in the coming weeks to months, but not quite as bullish as the long term is looking. So the way that I'm personally reading this is that a continuation of the rally that Harmony has been in over the past couple days to weeks could definitely continue. Certainly we could just continue to run and start realizing more of the short-term upside potential. And then really once we get up to here is where I'd be especially skeptical of it being able to continue to run in the short term. We're not there yet. But also a correction from here could also happen, would be totally within reason for us to either have a small pullback or even just have to consolidate for a while at current levels. So short term, largely undecided, but should the market remain bullish, I would think that this upside potential could be quite within reason or could be within play. And so I'd be watching for the long-term UDPI to get up to some of these higher levels before getting especially concerned. But again, that's if the broader markets remain bullish. If the broader markets don't remain bullish, I don't think Harmony is going to go it by itself. I don't think it's going to rally on its own. I think it's going to be hemmed in by those bigger macro concerns. So that's kind of the conditional probability that I put on it. If bullish broader markets, I'd expect Harmony to be able to at least put in a chunk of this upside in the coming months. We'll, of course, have to wait and see with that. So the final thing I want to talk about to kind of wrap us up, I'm just flipping over here to DeFi Llama. And here, this is basically a site, if you're not familiar, that gives information about DeFi on different chains. Or one of the things you can look at is DeFi across different layer 1 blockchains. And so, of course, Ethereum is kind of the big dog in the DeFi space. Almost 55% of the market share in DeFi is Ethereum, although it actually has been shrinking pretty steadily in kind of recent months. And, we can kind of see that there's a lot of chains that are now trying to compete with Ethereum, Luna having moved up to the number 2 spot. And if we scroll down a little bit more, here we find Harmony down at number 16. It's about $800 million of value locked in DeFi on the chain. So that's not bad. It puts it above some of the competitors, but it's not in the top running. It's not up at Avalanche, which is at 10 billion, or even Phantom 6.7 billion, or Solana 8.2, other kind of layer 1 blockchains. And, when we look at Harmony, kind of where a lot of that money is, a lot of it is in DeFi kingdoms. Not surprising. This has probably been kind of the flagship DeFi platform on Harmony for quite a while. Tranquil Finance also has quite a bit. This is kind of a borrowing and lending type of protocol here. And then some of these other kind of expected ones that are across a bunch of different chains have a decent amount of locked on as well. So what am I looking at for this, and why do I care? What's the importance of DeFi on these chains? Well, one of the things we talked about a lot is that with a lot of these layer 1 blockchains, one of the things that's been where people have been ascribing value to layer 1 chains that have a lot of DeFi adoption, just what we've seen, right? Look at Avalanche, went parabolic, back going into November. And again, I would surmise, or I would put forward, that in no small part that was due to its DeFi adoption. People were seeing that, drove a lot of kind of hype around it. People put a lot of value on those chains, and it went wild. Phantom went really crazy out of the summer of 21, and that, again, probably on the back of its DeFi adoption. Solana, probably, at least in part due to its DeFi adoption, also a little bit more in its NFTs there. Binance Smart Chain, lots of DeFi adoption, a lot of value being placed there, etc. You can kind of go through a lot of these chains. A narrative that's underlay a lot of these chains is DeFi adoption, giving them value, because that's kind of the game that a lot of these are playing. And Harmony, I see it in kind of competing in a similar space to some of these other ones. And it does have a decent number of protocols built on it, which is good. That's what you want to see, right? A lot of these most valuable chains, you look at them, they have a good amount of DeFi built on them. Terra is a bit of an outlier just because it's really off the back of UST and Anchor Protocol and things like that, which has probably given most of the value to Terra. But a lot of these other ones, ones that are more similar to Harmony, they have a lot of things building on them. Those things building on them brings in a lot of value locked, and then that can help drive up their value. So that's something that I'm watching for Harmonies. I'd like to see this increase. I'd like to see total value locked increase. I'd like to see the number of protocols increase, because if history is predictive of the future, or recent history continues in terms of how people value these chains, I'd expect the value of Harmony, the value of one to go up as DeFi adoption happens on Harmony. And of course, with the tech of Harmony has good tech. There's nothing holding it back from that perspective. There's no reason it can't compete in that space. I think it's just whether or not it's able to draw in more users from that perspective. That would be one thing that could give it additional leg up. Not to say the only use case of Harmony is DeFi by any means. Obviously, that's not the case. But it is one that's important, and it's one that people seem to care a lot about in the crypto space. So if we're just thinking about Harmony overall, just for flipping over the price levels here, Harmony's not been doing bad, especially badly out of the summer, right? We're still sitting well above the levels we were at in the summer, even though we did correct down a little bit more deeply more recently. But I don't see any special reason for concern there. And so really, again, if Harmony can just keep on kind of putting the proof in the pudding, adopting users, kind of showing its utility, I think, especially if the broader markets remain bullish, I think it's very plausible to see Harmony continue to move back up. And who knows, depending on how long these rallies can sustain, Harmony might even be able to go back to put up an all-time high. I think at the current risk levels, it's totally plausible we could make it that far if broader conditions allow. All right, if you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and follow us on Twitter. And remember, with UDPI and the TCI, we're all going to make it.